Okay, so for today, we will be talking about the introduction to the property, plant, and equipment. So in this lesson, it will deal with the definitions of the major types of property, plant, and equipment items, and also the cost, how to compute the cost of the PPE, and also the modes of acquisition. So how do we acquire property, plant, and equipment? So first is PPE, or the property, plant, and equipment, are tangible assets that have physical uh, substance, or they can be seen, they can be touched, and then naa siya physical niyang form. So mao na siya ang tangible. So second is they are used in the business, particularly in the production or supply of goods or services for rental or for administrative purposes, and they are long-term in nature, meaning they are expected to be used for more than one period. So these are the basic characteristics of property, plant, and equipment. Examples are we have land that is used in business, we have land held for future plant site. So ni palit ka og yuta or naa ka yuta that is intended para tukuran og building or planta or factory ba na siya. Uh, Also, we have building used in the business, equipment used in the production of goods, equipment held for environmental and safety reasons, equipment held for rentals, major spare parts, and long-lived standby equipment. Then we have furniture and fixture, and we have the bearer plants. So to recognize the PPE, of course, we have the basic niyang requirement, which is common to all types of asset, that there should be probable future economic benefits that will flow into the entity, and of course, the cost must be measured reliably. So upon the initial acquisition or initial niyang recognition, we need to measure our asset. So of course, di ba, kinahanglan man siya ma-measure reliably. So how do we measure the asset? So it will be initially measured at cost. And what comprises the cost of the item or the PPE? So that would be the purchase price, including the non-refundable purchase taxes after deducting the trade discounts and rebates. So you have to take note that it should be non-refundable, because if it's refundable, it's not part of the purchase price, or it's not part of the cost of the PPE. So that should be non-refundable. And we have the discounts and rebates. So you need to deduct the discount or the rebate regardless if you take the discount or not. So i-deduct na siya. Then costs directly attributable to bringing the asset to the location and condition necessary for it to be capable of operating in a manner intended by the management. And you have the present value of the decommissioning and restoration cost. So actually these are the basic items, but if you go through the different type of PPE, napon sila own list of the specific components of their cost. So this is a general nga mga items that will be included for all types of PPE. Then when do we stop capitalizing cost to the PPE? So what do we mean by capitalizing? So if we say it's capitalized, it means it is part or it is added to the asset account, or it's added to the value of the assets. For example, if you capitalize land, meaning you added it to the value of the land. If you say it's capitalized to the equipment, so na-add siya sa value sa equipment. So kano sa man daw ta nga dili na ta mag-capitalize, dili na siya ma-classify as an asset. So therefore, it will be classified in some other way. So we will no longer capitalize the cost to the PPE when the item is already in the location and condition necessary for it to be capable of operating. So for example, if the building is already finished and it's already capable of being used, so any expenses after nahuman ang building, it's no longer capitalized as part of the building. So, kinahanglan prior to the completion or prior to the occupation adto nga property or sa building, mao to siya ma-qualify as capitalizable cost. But after na gani nahuman ang building or na-occupy na gani ang building or na-occupy na property, nagamit na ang property, other expenses niya or cost, usually they are expensed when incurred. That is after na siya ma-kompleto. But prior to that, they can be capitalized. So that's why once the item or the PPE is already in the location and condition necessary for it to be operating as intended, you will no longer capitalize the costs. So it will be the costs or the expenses will be classified in some other category. So most of the time, they are classified as expense na lang. Then we have the measurement of cost. So most likely, your cost would be at the cash price equivalent on the acquisition date. If the payment is deferred beyond the normal credit term, so when we say it's deferred, normally it in some forms of PPE, pag mahal na siya or dako iyang value, lisod siya bayaran in spot cash. So there could be installments. So mo na siya gipasabot aning deferred beyond the normal credit terms. So the difference between the cash price equivalent and the payment would be treated as interest, which will be amortized over the period or the credit period. Then if the assets are self-constructed, meaning gigama siya sa company, wala siya gipalit. For example, building, instead of buying finish na nga building or building and land nga property, kay naamang kayuta, dito ka nagtukod sa imuhang yuta. So, the building nga imuhang gi-construct adto nga yuta, that's a self-constructed nga building. So, the cost is determined using the same principles as for an acquired asset, but it will not include any internal profits, like for example, savings on the self-construction and cost of abnormal amounts of wasted material, labor, or other resources incurred. So, same lang siya og treatment as if the asset was acquired. Of course, pag magama ka kagalingon mo asset na amang kay costs, for example, your materials, labor, and overhead. But these items here kaning duha, dili ni sila apil sa imuhang cost. Then there are several classes of PPE. So some of these are the following. You have land and buildings. So anong gitapo man jud sila ma'am, land and buildings kay of course mo follow naman siya nga if you bought a building, apil naman gyud na ang yuta ana, di ba? So lain sad og ang building ra imong gipalit pero ang yuta dili imuha. So pwede gihapon kag ma-kick out ana niya kay ang land kay immovable ba na siya. So nanagyo na siya sa ilawom. So usually if you buy building, apil na na siya ang yuta. Then you have machinery, ships, aircraft, motor vehicles, furniture and fixtures, office equipment, bearer plants. So we have land. So the most common PPE is land. That is the property that is used in the entity's operations as owner occupied. So meaning dapat ang nagamit ana is ang entity, and it is again katong iyahang definition for a PPE. It should be used for the production, or it could be for administration purposes or for selling the goods of the entity. So for example, the land on which the entity's office building was constructed and land used as a plant site. So land held for future plant site can also be classified as a PPE. So for example, again, ang imong yuta is ang plano nimo is tukuran nimo siya og administrative building or tukuran ba nimo siya og factory. So the land is part of the PPE. So the following are not classified as PPE, so therefore they are classified in some other way. So for example, if the land is sold in the ordinary course of business. So meaning, mao na gina siya imuhang gigamit as pang buy and sell. So therefore, the land is not for production, the land is not for selling, the land is not for administrative. So therefore, it's not PPE. So kay pang buy and sell man siya, kay pang baligya man siya. So that is classified as inventory. If it is a long-term assets held for sale, so land is a long-term asset man na siya, so therefore that's classified as non-current asset held for sale. Kano sa man ni siya mahitabo? For example, you have your existing land nga gigamit na nimo siya as PPE, but then naka-decide ka nga dili na nako siya gamiton as PPE. I want to sell it within 12 months na nakay um, intention na yun nga ibaligyan na siya within 12 months, then you're going to classify that as non-current asset held for sale. The land held for capital appreciation, so unsay pasabot og capital appreciation, so that's an increase in the value of the property, so that's classified as investment property. Land held for currently undetermined use, so meaning wala ka kabalo kung unsaon ba na nimo, kung tukuran ba na nimo, or himo ba na nimong garden, or himo ba nimo na siyang imo siyang paabangan, wa ka kaybaho unsay gamit, so that would be classified as investment property. If it is a land held as site for a building being constructed and developed for future use as investment property, or klaro na kayo ni siya, di ba? The intention is for it to be used as investment properties. Of course, that's classified as investment property. And if it is leased out under operating lease, gipaabangan na nimo siya, that's an investment property. Then we have the cost of land. So, mani akong gingon nga for a specific type of asset, na po siya mga specific costs. So, katong gimension ganiha tong tulo, katong general man to siya, katong purchase price, ya katong mga costs in order to bring the asset to its present location and condition, and also the decommissioning or restoration costs. So, mo to siya mga general nga costs. Kani mga specific. So, for land, you have the purchase price including other necessary costs such as the broker's commissions. But usually pag magbaligya og yuta, naamantay intermediary na ay laing person nga mag-arrange sa buyer o sa seller. So naamantoy commission tong broker. Then you have closing costs such as titling costs, attorney's fees, and recording fees. So mo ni siya related ni siya to obtain a clean title for the property. Then, cost incurred in getting the land in a condition for its intended use. So, yung mong ipahiluna ang yuta such as surveying, grading, filling, draining, and clearing. Then, unpaid taxes prior to date of acquisition assumed by the buyer. So, you have to take note that it should be assumed by the buyer, meaning ang buyer may mo bayad adtong mga wala pa nabayaran nga taxes, because you cannot transfer the property if the taxes are unpaid. So, you have to take note na unpaid prior to the date of acquisition, before gipalit ang yuta, because kung after na na siya nga tax, after na acquire na ng property niya na i-tax nga bayaran, dili na siya appeal sa land, that will be treated as an expense. And again, pag before na siya napalit ang yuta and then i-assume sa nagpalit, so that is part of the cost of the land. If the taxes are already incurred after na napalit ang yuta, that's no longer part of the cost of the land. Then you have assumption of any liens, mortgages, or encumbrances on the property. So pag may mga kautangan nga naka-attach adto nga land, for example, ang land is gi mortgage, so gihimo siyang collateral for an utang, and of course dili man pwedeng i-release ang yuta to the buyer kung wala pa na settle tong utang nga related adto nga land, kadi gihimo mang collateral ang yuta. So, katong nagpalit sa yuta, kinahanglan inigdawat niya sa property is wala na jud to siya mga tulubagon. So, kung iyahang i-assume tong mga utang related ato nga yuta, iyahatong bayaran ba to niya tong utang para lang yun maiyahon ang property. So, appeal to siya sa cost of land, because of course, diba, that's added nga gasto sa part sa buyer para lang yun maiyahon ang property. So pag i-assume na niya ang mga liens or mortgages or any encumbrances, so that's part of the cost of the land. Then you have special assessments for local government, maintained improvements such as you have street lights, sewers, and drainage systems. So, so many special assessments, these are taxes paid by the landowner as contribution to the cost of the public improvements. And these are capitalized. Again, these are added to land because the public improvements will increase the value of the land. So, man siya, appeal na siya sa cost of the land. Then you have option paid to acquire the land. Of course, pag imuha siyang gidayon og palit, appeal sa cost of the land ang option paid. Di ba ang option is tagaan ka og choice if you're going to buy or not. If you're not going to buy the property, so the option paid will be considered as an expense. But if you're going to buy the property, so ang option nga nabayad mo because you exercise the option to buy the land, so that's part of the cost of the land. If the cost incurred to if there are costs incurred to induce the tenants to vacate the premises, so panangitan na ay mga nagpuyo sa imong property, nag-squat, squatters, so na ay gamit ng mga informal settlers sa imuhang property. So, ngano na magka-informal settlers man siya, ma'am. So, pananglitan ang property nimo is wala nimo siya na bakuran o tarong and then naay namuyo anang imuhang yuta. So, of course, since imuha maghihapon ng yuta kay wala man na nila napalit, igura man sila nga nagpuyo adto, nagtukod lang sila dito pero wala man gyud na transfer ang title. So, of course, kinahanglan man sila pahawaon kung pananglitan ibaligya na na siya og lain. So ikaw nga buyer, kung nakagasto ka para ma-convince tong mga namuyo didto nga manghawa because of course kinahanglan man gyud nimo siya pahawaon kung gamiton nimo ang property kung tukuran na nimo. So katong gasto nimo para ma-induce sila nga mo vacate sa property and the cost of relocating and reconstructing the property belonging to others will be part of the cost of the land. Then you have the initial estimate of the restoration cost for which the entity has a present obligation, and you have any additional land improvements that have indefinite useful life, such as the cost of draining, clearing, grading, leveling, filling, surveying, subdividing, and other permanent improvements. Then we have the land improvements. So sa iyahang term, these are improvements in the land. So naa kay gidugang para mapanindot or mapa-enhance ang imuhang yuta or to make it more suitable for use depending on the purposes why you have acquired the land. So the land improvements, okay, so example of the land improvements, you have the private driveways, you have walks, fences, and then you also have parking lots. So, di ba mao man ni mga gipang attach nato sa ato ang yuta to improve the property. So, what would be the treatment ani nila? Like for example, drainages, water systems. You also have cost of trees, shrubs, plants, and other landscaping. So, since land improvements have definite useful life, they are segregated from the cost of the land and should be depreciated over the useful life. So, kani sila since naaman ni siya yung mga physical substance nga pwedeng ma-depreciate. So, for example, itong imuhang simento nga nagamit, kahoy ba na siya for your fences. So, you have here mga materials para mabutang, ma-set up ng mga drainage or water system. So, these are depreciable man nga assets. So, that's why you need to segregate these land improvements from the land and the land improvements will be depreciated. Then we'll proceed to building. So building is classified as PPE again if it is used in the entity's operations as owner occupied property. So again, if it is used to sell ba goods or to for the production of goods or for the administrative purposes, gihimo siyang office. So buildings that are constructed or developed as owner-occupied property in the future. So again, these are classified as PPE. So the following are not part of PPE. They are not building under PPE. So we have the building being sold in the ordinary course of business. So parehas siya og treatment atong sa land, di ba? If they are sold in the ordinary course of business, it would be inventory. If its intention is to be sold within 12 months, so that would be non-current asset held for sale because the building is a non-current asset, but now you want it to be sold in the near future. Building owned or held as leased asset by the entity and leased out under one or more operating leases. So that's an investment property. Building that is vacant but is held to be leased out under one or more operating leases. So again, that's investment property. And then building being constructed, developed for future use as investment property. So that is an investment property. Then what would be the cost of the purchase building? So it will include the purchase price. So of course you have the other costs such as brokers, legal fees, assumptions of liens, mortgages, encumbrances, option paid to acquire the buildings. Again, if it's not acquired, then the option is expense. Unpaid taxes prior to the date of acquisition assumed by the buyer. Costs incurred to induce tenants to vacate the premises and cost of getting the building in the condition for its intended use, such as remodeling, renovation, and other repairs. And you have to take note, it should be prior to occupancy because once after na siya sa occupancy, it will be treated as expense. Remember, di ba? Sa itong rule para mo cease na ta, cessation of the capitalization of cost, di ba? Pag mo cease na ta if it's already in its condition for condition that is suited for the intended use. So, nahuman naman siya. So, dili na ka mag-capitalize. Kani, kay wala pa man nahuman, prior to occupancy pa man ni siya, nagasto ning mga items ani. So, therefore, it's part of the building. Then, if it is a self-constructed building, you have the materials, labor, and overhead, architectural costs, supervision costs, cost of building permit, excavation, so magkubkub, insurance costs and safety inspection, cost of temporary structures built during the construction, and cost of subsequent removal. So, dahil na temporary fencing, apil na siya. Interest on borrowings. Kung nangutang ka for the purpose to construct a building, the interest related to that borrowing nga para gyud sa building ang proceeds atong pagpangutang. So ang interest adto is part of the cost of the self-constructed building. There's a separate chapter for the borrowing cost wherein you may allocate the borrowing cost to the building, and if it's not related to the building, so of course dili siya apel sa cost of the building. So dili related sa building. Namagoy times nga na nangutang ka pero dili tanan sa imong nautang is um dili tanan giutang nimo is nadung sa gasto sa building na ay part ato nga nagamit for general purpose. So kinahanglan nimo nang kuhaon kung pila man gyud dapat ang attributable to the building. But if the borrowing is intended gyud solely for the building, wala gyud siya laing gigamitan. So ang interest nga na-incur nimo adto nga borrowings madung ito tanan sa building nga account. Expenditures for service equipment and fixtures made a permanent part of the structure. So that's also part of the cost of self-constructed building. Then the following are not part of the cost of the self-constructed buildings. If there are internal profits or savings on self-construction, cost of abnormal amounts of wasted materials, labor, other resources due to inefficiencies, and cost of uninsured hazards or claims for uninsured accidents. So remember, if you can recall, 'di ba, ang appeal sa cost sa imong building is appeal tong insurance. For example, insurance sa imong mga workers. Pero kung simbako-simbako wala ka ni kuha og insurance para nila, unya na disgrasya ang imuhang empleyado, imuhang worker, and then nakabayad ka og danyos para adto kung nakabayad silang hospitalization, silang treatment. So of course, iba makagasto man ka. Katong gasto sa hospitalization nimo dili nimo hospitalization sa imong worker or any other nga bayad sa damages, dili to part sa building. Again, katong gasto palangitan wa ka ni kuhag insurance, wala ka ni acquire og insurance para sa imuhang workers unya na disgrasya siya, of course na gyud tay mga bayron nun kay diha man sila na disgrasya sa ato ang trabahoan. So ang katong gastos tong mga damages, hospitalization, kato siya dili nato pwede i-add sa cost of the building. Nganuman, ma-overstate atong building, unya nganuman na-overstate man siya tungod kay naatay mga additional nga gasto. Nya unsa may hinungdan ngano naay additional nga gasto tungod kay wala ta mo acquire og insurance. Kay kung ni acquire pa ta og insurance para sa ato ang workers, unya simba ko madisgrasya gyud sila, ang insurance company na may sagot adtong ilahang mga gastounon, di ba? Dili naman ang company, ang atong company ang mobayad adto. Pero tungod kay wala man ta mo acquire, so maingon nato nga negligence sa tong part, di ba? Nganong wala man nato sila kuhay og insurance. So dapat ang gasto or claims for the uninsured incidents should be separately classified as expense on the part of the company and should not be added to the cost of the building. Kay kung gani imo na siyang i-add, murag mo dako ang value sa building pero katubang additional nga cost sa building, nakapanindot ba to siya sa building or na-increase ba iyang future benefits? Wala. That is a result of not being prepared. Wala na to gi andaman og insurance ang ato ang mga workers or employees. That's why this is not part of the self-constructed building. So if you can recall, kung nabani siya sa ano na to, insurance, di ba? Ang insurance, apel sa cost. Pero pag na-disgrasya, o yan na yung mga claims, na yung mga bayro nun, wala na ilabot sa building. Okay? Then you have cost of private driveways, walks, permanent fences, parking lots, and drainages and water systems that are not included in the building's blueprint. But if they are part of the blueprint, piningnan na siya sa inyong overall planning, this will be part of the building. Okay? Di ba dapat prior man siya? Di ba tong ruling usually is prior to the completion? So, kani kay, if these are included in the blueprint sa plano sa building, apil na siya daan, so ma-include na siya sa building. Pero pag wala na siya sa plano, o niya nakauna na kamurag nindot lagi ni siya butangan og parking lot, kidako pag space, magbutang kog parking lot. So, katong parking lot, dili to siya apil sa building. That would be part of the improvements. So, ito na siya sa land improvements. Then you have the building improvements. So these refer to costs incurred to subsequent to occupancy. So dapat subsequent, so after na nahuman ang building. So subsequent to occupancy of the purchased building or subsequent to completion of a self-constructed building that either increase the useful life of the building or improve its current state. Of course, kay improvements na siya, so dapat na kalambuan imuhang building. So what will be the cost of the building improvements? So the cost of the elevator, okay, cost of elevator, escalator, or similar items that was not originally included in the purchase building or in the blueprint. Okay, again, kung wala na siya na-appeal sa imuhang blueprint, so that's a building improvement. So escalator, elevator, or other similar items. Next is ventilation systems, plumbing, lighting, installed after occupancy. So kung after na siya, so wala na siya appeal sa building, di ba? That would be part of the building improvements. So dili po siya nga expense siya. It's still an asset. Kaya naa pa man siya future use beyond 1 year. So since it's after occupancy, nahuman na malang building, so dili na siya mo qualify as part of the building, but it will be qualified to the cost of the building improvements. Kay depreciable man ni sila nga asset. So ventilation, so you habang air conditioning mala ninyo, you have the lighting system. Kaya na may usahay nga ang company na ay centralized nga ventilation, centralized pod nga lighting So again, if after na siya nahuman na ang building or napuy-an na ang building, that's building improvements. Kung elevator, ay ha pa siya gitaod, pagkahuman na nahuman ng building, pagtanaw ni mga murag hangat lagi kayo mag lakaw sa hagdanan, magbutang taog elevator. Since wala man siya sa original nga planning of the building, nakanahuna-hunaan lang nimo kay nakasuway naman ka og saka naog nga hangat kayo, so katong elevator mahimo siyang building improvement. Pero kung nana siya adtong plano sa blueprint kanang unsa nang blueprint pam katang bang naay drawing sa architect, di ba, unsay porma sa entire nga area, entire nga building. Pag naa na siya dito daan ang elevator, ang escalator, so that's part of the building. Pero again, pag wala siya dito sa plano sa imuhang building or sa construction, so that's a building improvement. So again, if it is installed before occupancy or during construction, that's part of the building. Immovable fixtures attached to the building, which if removed would necessarily damage the building, it's part of the building improvements. Immovable. Dili siya ma-transfer. If the items are movable, then that's part of the furniture and fixtures. Then you have again sidewalks, pavements, parking lots, and driveways. Unsa ganini sila? So these are part of the building if they are included in the blueprint for the construction of the new building. Kung naa siya mismo sa ilang building, for example, parking lot nga naa sa sulod sa building, Dati parking lot nga nasa sulod sa building, ma'am. Una ay ah, in some mga malls kay wala man sila dako kaayo nga space sa gawas sa ilahang mall. Adto nila ibutang ang ilahang parking lot sa ibabaw, sa pinakaibabaw or naa sa basement. So mao na siya nga pwede siyang ma-part sa iyahang building. So you have, if this is part of the building construction, kay entire area man gina siya, so it's part of the building. If they are occasionally made or incurred not in connection with the construction of the new building, so meaning after na siya natukod sa building, so again, this is part of the land improvements. Okay? Nakabutang man po siya sa yuta, di ba? So, palangitan ang parking lot nimo is outside the building. So, separate siya. So, naman siya sa yuta. So, improvement siya sa land. Ang imuhang driveway, imuhang sidewalks, mahimo siyang part sa land improvements. Dili siya himong expense, but i-classify siya as to add another asset. So, again, if appeal siya sa plano sa imuhang construction, it's part of the building. But if it's not part of the construction, sakala nimo nahunahunaan nga magdugang ko ani sa ako ang property. So if it pertains to something that is attached to the land, if it's attached to the land, then that's it. That is a land improvements. If it is attached to the building, di ba katong escalator, elevator, of course dili man na siya attached sa land. So that would be building improvement. So kung naa siya sa land, naka-attach, so land improvements. Then we have for equipment. So we have several types of equipment. Basta na word nga equipment. So these are under the equipment. Okay. Then we have the cost. So purchase price, including other necessary costs such as broker's commissions, non-refundable purchase taxes. You have freight, handling charges. Ngano naman na freight diri ma'am, lagi freight dito sa building sa ato ang land. Of course, movable maning equipment. I-transport man ni siya. Ang land og building kay ano raman na siya, i-construct na siya. Di man na siya pwedeng i-deliver. Kani siya kay ma-deliver man ang equipment. So all of these while in transit. And then you have cost of necessary special foundations or platform because there are certain machines nga kinahanglan nimo siyang ibutang sa usa ka certain nga stationary nga butanganan. So kinahanglan siya og platform. Then assembling and installation costs, cost of testing and conducting trial runs. Then initial estimate of the commissioning and restoration cost for which the entity has a present obligation. Kay for example, imuha nang ilisan ang equipment, ibalhin na nimo na siya. So kinahanglan mi nimo tangtangon na siya sa iyahang placement kay di ba nagbutang man ka og foundation or platform niya. So para ma-restore ang area kung asa gibutang ang equipment tabi nagdinagko na siya naamantay decommissioning o restoration cost. Then we have the cost of equipment will not include the following. So cost of relocating the equipment after it has been put to the location and condition originally intended by management. So as I have mentioned earlier, di ba, pag tangtangon nimo ang equipment, di ba, naaman to dismantling. Katong dismantling, katong restoration, decommissioning, removal, that's part of the cost of the equipment, di ba, diri? Apil na siya sa cost of equipment tong pagtangtang sa item. Pero pag ang cost para ibalhin na siya, walay labot sa cost of the equipment. So again, kung ato siyang tangtangon sa iyahang placement, kung asa siya gibutang, i-dismantle man na nato, or ato man na siyang i-restore ang area kung asa siya gibutang, apil siya sa cost of the equipment. But if you're going to transport that to another place, ang cost sa pag-transfer niya or pag-relocate adto nga equipment is not anymore part of the cost of equipment. Then cost of training personnel who will be responsible in operating the equipment, it's not part of the cost of equipment. Pero katong ganiha, tong installation, apil to sa cost of equipment. Pero para magamit ang equipment, it's already operational and then mag-hire ka og mo or mag-train kag person para mo gamit ana, wala na ilabot sa cost of equipment because the equipment is already in its present condition and location. So this is not no longer part of the cost of the equipment. It will be treated as an expense for the entity para sa training costs. Cost of dismantling and removing an old equipment belonging to the entity prior to the installation of the new equipment. So let's go back to the last nga tong requirement. Remember that this is the initial estimate. So meaning wala bago pag yun ni siya pagpalit nimo sa item, pagkapalit nimo sa equipment, nanakay na-estimate kung pila gani iyahang cost para tangtangon. And then you have to take note of this term wherein you have a present obligation to decommission and restore the area. So kung later on na nimo nahunahulaan nga imuha na siyang i-transfer, so man siya aning next niya kaning sa number 3. So the cost of dismantling and removing an old equipment belonging to the entity prior to the installation of the new equipment, so that's no longer part of the cost of equipment. So kinahanglan nga katong decommissioning nga liability na estimate na nimo siya upon acquisition. So dapat katong pag initial recognition na nakay na set up nga amount. Kaya kung later on pa na nimo nahunahunaan nga mao ni ang cost sa dismantling or ana pa ka naka-establish kung pilay amount, ana na gyud tay mga imuha na siyang tangtangon, wala na siya labot sa cost of the equipment. Again, not included in the cost of the equipment. Kinahanglan nga katong decommissioning, katong pagtangtang niya, this is already present during the time when you acquire the property or acquire the equipment. Kay if later on na siya, that's no longer part of the cost of the equipment. Kay ining debit nimo sa equipment manggod, apil na ni siya sa costing. So dapat sa pagpalit nimo daan sa equipment, naa na ni siya nga amount dili kay later on na siya. Kay kung later on pa na nimo na quantify kung pila ang dismantling, so dili na siya labot sa cost of the equipment. Kay di ba initial recognition bayat ni. So mahimo na siyang expense. Mahimo na siyang expense on the part of the company. Then you have the bearer plant. So, unsa man ning bearer plant? Plant, unsa man siya? Planta ba ni siya nga factory or plant yun nga plant nga tanom? So, this is actually a tanom. So, it's a bearer plant is a living plant that is used in the production or supply of agricultural produce expected to bear produce for more than one period and has a remote likelihood of being sold as agricultural produce except for incidental scrap sales. So this refers to plants nga usually these are the fruit-bearing trees. Ang common example na yung mga fruit-bearing trees were in more than one period magsige na sila pamunga. They are considered as property, plant, and equipment and not biological asset. Na separate nga classification for biological assets, but this one kaning bearer plant nga more than one period ang iyang gamit nga magsige na pud siya og pamunga sunod na pud, so gi-consider siya as PPE. And we have a separate chapter for the biological assets and also how to account for the bearer plants, biological assets, and the agricultural produce. So the bearer plant is accounted for similar to a self-constructed asset. If you like this video, please don't forget to click subscribe and hit the notification bell to be updated with the latest video lessons. Thank you for watching.